Good morning. I'm very glad to be here, and I will try to be very quick in dealing with such a huge subject. From emigration to diaspora, 40 years of Italian research on Italian migrations. This presentation will illustrate the development of Italian scholarship on Italian migration in the 40-year span 1977-2017, assuming Marcus Liansen perspective of time and space. Recent scholarship has dealt with Italian migration, showing that started well before Italy's unification, going from the ancien regime to the new Italian migrations. Also, our geography of migration has changed in this time span. According to different periodization, the scholarship has dealt with transatlantic, United States, Americas, and Australia, European, African, Asiatic, internal migration. These changes included the adoption, I'm sorry, I'll take 2 minutes to have people settle.
Good idea.
These changes included the adoption of new methodologies and perspectives. For instance, they have assumed gender and a new lexicon or terminology that adopted unfamiliar words, concepts, and categories. Migrations instead of immigration or emigration, diaspora, transnationalism, mobilities, globalism, Italicity, postcolonialism, and subjects such as refugee, asylum seekers, and so on. So these are all the new entries in Italian migration history during the last 4 decades. Also, the scholarship had to find a way to communicate history to the public, to face the challenges of the global migrations. Let's talk about, let's see the first slide, which you see the development of Italian emigration. And in the 70s, for the first time, there was in Italy a decline in immigration, albeit strong internal migrations continued. In 1973, the Italian migratory experience balance became negative. We got immigrants for the first time, relevant numbers of immigrants they started to arrive. And that was perceived as the end of the Italian emigration, even if the number of expatriates were still between 30,000 and 50,000 a year, mainly from southern and some still from the Veneto region. In 1989, Emilio Franzina wrote an article on the status of historiography in the previous decade, noticing a slow start, un lento avvio, and a quick development in the 80s. In his article, which we published on Nostra Italia, there are 30 pages of bibliography. So, we made up. Up to the 80s, there had been a sort of division of labor between those in Italy who studied emigration and concentrating on the economic aspect of the immigration, and scholars abroad who devoted themselves to the study of the modalities of integration of the immigrants, usually in the Anglophone transatlantic countries led by the US, where migration studies had developed after the discovery of ethnicity in the 70s. To quote some of the pioneers of the Italian scholarship, I would like to mention the Florentine School, headed by Giorgio Spini and Marcello Pagnini, who organized important symposiums in the 60s and the 70s with the participation of young Lagumina and Beccoli, and among the Italians there was Luigi De Rosa, who studied immigrants remittances, and Ercole Sori, who was an economist, and anthropologist Carla Bianco. The development of Italian scholarship The development of Italian scholarship has been very well represented in the journals. The first reviews or journals are linked to institutions such as Il Veltro, Rivista della Civiltà Italiana, started in 1957, the official journal of the Società Dante Alighieri. Since the beginnings in the 60s, Il Veltro has dedicated around 40 special issues to cultural relationship between Italy and the numerous European countries. To another big institution, the Catholic Church is linked to the Emigrazione, founded by the Scalabrinian order, which reflected the involvement of the Church on migrations to frame, quote, the immigration in a pastoral perspective in a planetary dimension. In 1963, its first concern were Italian internal migration. Its policy has always been influenced by the necessity of the moment, as Matteo Sanfilippo, one of its oldest contributors, asserts. The sociological imprint of the journal derives from his directors and cooperators, Luigi Graziano Tassello, Gianfausto Roso, Luigi Favora. They started to investigate the role of the parishes, but soon, with the cooperation of external experts like Massimo Livi Bacci, they expanded to different aspects tied to the contemporary social emergency. Italian overseas migration were supplanted in the 60s by European migrations and by internal migration at the end of the decade. Annalisa Rossella in the 69 wrote an article on the Italian brain drain. In the 80s, the journal started to publish articles on immigration in Italy, and since then, half of the journal is dedicated to this issue. Another Catholic institution, the Fondazione Migrantes, published since 2006 the Rapporti Italiani nel Mondo, a demographic analysis of figures elaborated from the EIRE, anagrafe degli italiani residenti all'estero, and they publish short articles on issues related to contemporary Italian migration. While institutions run by the state, the church, and political parties have tended to deal with the present and the practical consequences of Italian migration, voting rights, sustained at the beginning by right-wing parties, workers' rights by the FILEF, Italian internal migrations, retirement pensions, and so on, the scholarship and the research took their own route. Altra Italia, the journal I'm dealing with, was born out of the interest of an Italian migration on Italian migration by the Agnelli Foundation, one of the first Italian cultural foundations, at the end of the 70s. The US were the first focus. In 1982 they held an exhibition, Integrato Metropolitano, 3 phases of Italian immigration, New York, Chicago, and Turin, to make the history of immigrants known in Italy and to look at the history of immigrants abroad to understand Italian society that was facing a huge internal migratory phenomenon from southern and eastern regions. Always in the 80s, it was published Ero Americani, dedicated to Argentina, Brazil, and the United States, that put together scholars from different countries. It was one of the first international dialogue among scholars, which took to the creation of the Altra Italia journal, which I already mentioned, which had as main purpose the comparison of experiences and the circulation of information among all the scholars of the Italian abroad, to understand the contribution that Italians and their descendants had given to the construction of American and the Australian societies, as Marcello Pacini, the director, wrote in the first issue 1989. But the journal then I became the director of the journal, and there were many changes, and we opened up to European migration, to internal migration, and to Asia and African post-colonial studies too, so the whole range of Italian migrations. In the meantime, we are still in the early 90s. After the Lento View, a new generation of scholars had started to study migration, thus expanding the topic. One subject I would like to mention is the ethnic women studies. Since the role of journals has been important in this respect, the first articles on Italian women migrants were published by young Italian scholars such as Luisa Cetti, Elisabetta Vezzosi, and in a journal, they were published in journal. In 1993, in Altre Italie, I tried to organize a comparative issue on Italian women experience, and we had scholars from all over: Donna Gabaccia, Franca Iacovetta, Rosalind Pesmas-Cooper, Ellie Vast, Lorraine Slump-Giron, Alicia Bernasconi, Carina Friede-Silberstein, and Virginia Yance McLaughlin. What came out was that Anglophone countries were ready to start to write Italian ethnic women history, while in Latin America it was research still to be done. So we had just a very short article and for a beginning. Now studies have improved a lot. But also in Italy we had a lot of problems because we didn't have at that time Italian women history in Italy, I mean. So we didn't know about the social history of Italian women, and we had very many problems in comparing it with other experience, with the migrants' experience, because we didn't know anything. So I remember at that time I started to study all the inquiries on the southern region, the Inchiesta Iacini and Inchiesta Faina, were describing the Italian rural living conditions, including women, and so we had a term. We got to know who the women migrants were when they left for the United States, how life was in Italy at the time of the Great Migration, for instance. So always talking about journals, we have another journal dedicated to migration, which is Asei Archivio Storico dell'Emigrazione Italiana, more related to historical issues, not sociological issues. Okay. Over the last 3 decades, the lexicon has also changed. The immigration dichotomy has been exceeded. New words have been added to our vocabulary. Like as I said, refugees and also new migrants. And this is a problem because we do not, as we were saying in the previous section, we do not have a word to define this new form of migration from Italy. We did an inquiry 5 or 6 years ago to understand how to call these new Italian immigrants, because sometimes they consider themselves immigrants, sometimes they call themselves expat. None of them, of course, who think about themselves as a brain drain or cervello in fuga, which in Italian sounds terrible. They didn't accept it. But there are huge numbers, as you can see, and from this graph you can see that the whole Italian immigration and the immigration of the people who immigrated in Italy, second generation Italians too. So from Italy are emigrating not only Italians, but also the new immigrants into Italy because of the crisis. They are living because of the crisis. Italians are living for many reasons, as we were saying in the previous section. It has become more and more for economic reasons, but few years ago, it was also for political reason. We had a questionnaire with over 1,000 of answers, and the second reason for emigration mentioned by the people we interviewed was because of the Italian system. Because in Italy you need to be recommended to find a job, otherwise you do not find easily a job, or because the political situation is corrupted, and some wrote Berlusconi in the answer, just one word. And so the reasons were very, very many. We had clouds with this, so you could see this. And the problem with the new migration are the numbers, because the IRA only register people who register, and all the ISTAT also can't register people. Why? Because people within Europe, they till now they are free to move around without showing any passport and so on, needing a passport or so. You can't count on it, and outside Europe they have tourist visa, as you know, student visa and so on. So they do not register to the area. What we did during our inquiry, published in the book La Meglio Italia, is that we looked at the sources and the country of immigration, which is very easy to do with Australia and with Germany. With few countries, you have these incoming people counted. It's harder in other countries. So in England, for instance, we use the insurance numbers. Oh, 5 minutes, okay. We use the insurance number, and what came out is that over this number has to be tripled at least. So if the official statistics say 1,500 people a year, it means that there are over 300,000. Okay. But this is one of the things we have to solve about the new. Another important, I go back to the slide, no, I'm sorry, to slide 3, okay. And another important scholarship was published on collective work, so we had many volumes on the history of Italian immigration, but I will leave this subject because I have very little time, but I want to talk a little bit about public history. Italian migration history has been considered since up till a few years ago a personal history, not a public history, because people were talking about it within the families, and it wasn't not a shame, but something like that. And it had not got a public recognition at national level. So we started to work on it, and one of the good results was in 2011, when the big exhibition celebrating the Italian unity, we had a whole section dedicated to Italian migrations. And it was important because it was a public recognition of the Italian, of such an important part of Italian history, which had been hidden also in history books. In school books don't talk enough about Italian migration. And there were a few events. We had some journalists publishing bestseller like Gian Antonio Stella, movies like Nuovo Mondo and Good Morning Babylonia, which spoke about Italian migration, making it a public issue, but they had the problem that concentrate the public attention on the Great Migration and the America. The America, which is United States, is the winning. Other migrations are very, very little known. The reason of the debate is that the popularity, the starting of the popularity of Italian migration is because political parties, because of the Italian vote abroad, are interested in it. Regions, starting in the 1970s, dealt very much on their emigrants abroad. They had kept more contact than the Italian state with the emigrants. Also, the ICT played a huge role, as we have seen during these days. We had an effort to make an Italian migration museum, which started in 2009, and is still looking for a permanent place, which probably will be Genoa. Even if to have a national museum, it's really a big responsibility, because it has to be something on the move. It has to be sided by research centers and adjourned continuously. It's not just a place to put objects or description. It's to educate the public to history. You have to work it in it very hard. And conclusion. So let me just because I would like to. I have many issues on the floor. I would like to let some time for discussion. So I would say that we have new subjects coming up, and this world is continuously changing. So we have to be very much aware of what's going on, and I think that conferences like this can help very, very, very much, because something we really like is that a transnational dialogue among scholars. We started very early, but we are not succeed yet, because we succeed in having Italian scholars at least learning the languages, at least learning English and reading foreign scholarship. But we do not have all the Italian immigration countries read Italian. So we have a kind of schizophrenic world of publication on Italians, which completely ignore what's going on Italian scholarship. That's the reason I gave this picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddalena.